Good day. So my name's Ed from MindMax, and today I've been pondering why, you know, we're in the middle of an explosion of digital intelligence. So we've got these immense machines which have memorized the entire internet and can be probed and conjure amazing dialogues and intelligent behavior as a result of that. And there are two main areas where everyone gets really excited about. What are we actually going to apply this AI, as people dismissively call it, to the world? And there's two areas which everyone gets really excited about. One is solving cancer, fair enough, a very unpleasant disease, and it'll be great to do that. And the other one is creating AI tutors. First of all, let's just listen to these people whittering on about AI tutors, just to kind of set the scene. Genuinely believe by a lot of people that it's going to revolutionize the world.
The ideal for learning is to have a personal tutor who understands your motivation, who's seeing what you're getting right and wrong. And the AIs can learn from the very best personal tutors.
And the way we're going to do that is by giving every student on the planet an artificially intelligent but amazing personal tutor.
We can see a path to a world where every student gets a great AI personalized tutor, and that will transform.
And I was all thinking, like, where does this come from? And it turns out it comes from the story of Aristotle, one of the world's greatest ever philosophers, teaching Alexander the Great, the legendary general marauder.
Do you know who Alexander the Great's tutor was for about 14 years? Right, Aristotle. And I read this, I became immensely jealous. And I think I would have enjoyed that a great deal.
And the logic seems to be, okay, well, Aristotle was a genius, and he was one-on-one tutor to Alexander the Great. And that this one-on-one tuition led to him absorbing the great philosopher's wisdom, better than by any other method, and that the absorption of this wisdom kind of led to his greatness. And I think this is what we see in the story. We're like, wow, if we could all have an epic tutor, we could all become amazing like Alexander the Great did. I actually love various aspects of this story, except that it's complete nonsense. And so I'm going to just kind of guide us through a little bit of history. I took the liberty of reading a book and doing a bit of research, and let's jump in and see how it all works. So, first of all, it's true that Alexander was in educational contact with Aristotle. So look this up, and if we look here, yeah, Aristotle was actually hired by Alexander's father, who had raised his hometown in a previous conquest, so that he'd rebuild the town and set free the citizens. So, Aristotle was kind of hustled into it, and he basically became the headmaster of a school called at the place of Mietza, the Shrine of the Nymphs. And this was far from a kind of one-on-one tutoring setup. This was actually a boarding school for Macedonian nobles. There were about 10 to 20 of them. Some of the others are actually known to us today. Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Cassander, Nearchus, Perdiccas, all of them historic figures, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But I think this is the first thing to recognize is that Aristotle was not actually one-on-one tutor to Alexander the Great at all. He was the headmaster of his boarding school, where he probably did a bit of tuition, but there's a big difference, let's face it, especially if we're going to base our AI education dreams upon this historical anecdote. So, yeah, Aristotle was headmaster in an elite boarding school that Alexander attended for 3 years with 20 other Macedonian nobles. Okay, let's have a look at our second claim here, that this, Aristotle's one-to-one tuition led to him absorbing the great philosopher's wisdom. And, that would potentially be pretty cool. And let's just take it as read that Aristotle was awesome, which he actually kind of was. So I dipped back into his ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, perhaps his greatest work. And he's actually got a really neat way of thinking that we've kind of forgotten today, which is worth sharing in its own right. So today, when we think of like good or bad, it's binary, right? So let's take the realm of like how you treat other people. And so, in our worldview, you can treat other people in a nice way, and you can be kind of kind and generous, or you can be like nasty and mean. And these are kind of the two extremes of the continuum. So, here's a man being mean, and here is a woman being nice. And that's kind of how we think about all of our virtues. So, for example, bravery, you think of people, if it's really good if you're very brave, if you can overcome fear, and it's really bad if you're a complete wimp and would sort of whimper in the corner crying when your kind of only child was threatened by a a small animal or something like that. That we don't admire that. Aristotle actually has a different way of thinking about all these vices, virtues, and it's pretty epic. And so instead of saying like, oh, we've got niceness and meanness, he looks at all virtues as a balance between two extremes. So, for example, let's take bravery. Bravery is like having the right amount of ability to overcome your fear and the right amount of courage, but it can actually go too far. You can become reckless. For example, you can run out in front of a machine gun to certain death, or you can, of course, still be a blithering wimp. But the virtue is actually to be right in the middle. And this is true of niceness or kindness as well. You can be like kind, and that's the right balance of generosity against being mean or being sort of obsequious or excessively generous. Now, this is actually a neat kind of transcendence of the binary distinction we still live with today, and it'd be great if we learned it today, and it would have been great if Alexander had taken in any of these lessons at all, which even a brief survey of his life reveals that he utterly failed to do. So let's just run through some examples. One of Aristotle's virtues has to do with proper ambition. And, ambition is the kind of the balancing of your own interests and greatness against excess or, vice, deficiency. And so, in Aristotle's world, if you're properly ambitious, you kind of pick goals which suit your talents and which are in harmony with the world beyond you. But this was not Alexander's scale. Alexander was very much on the megalomaniac end of the spectrum. This is a quick look at his empire, which is basically most of the known world, and his poor army, who were endlessly trying to mutiny and get the hell out of there, were forced on this vast expedition, to conquer evermore. Alexander, meanwhile, began to think of himself as a god. And of course, as soon as it was done, the empire almost immediately collapsed because he hadn't established his supply lines. So we can see that this is a clear failure to learn Aristotle's lessons on ambition. Okay, next take respect, philia, kind of almost like niceness here, where you can kind of be respectful towards people, and that's kind of a proper balance, or you can be kind of fanboyish and lose all perspective, or you can be contemptuous and mean. Now, let's just take the case of his treatment of the Persian people, who he claimed he claimed these people were absolutely marvelous, and he kind of took on some of their customs, except that he burned down Persepolis in a drunken rage after a suggestion from a prostitute, and actually that basically destroyed hundreds of years of absolutely priceless treasures of the Achaemenid Empire. The historian Pierre Briand says, the contradiction between Alexander's supposed respect for Persian customs and his destruction of their most sacred royal site reveals the shallowness of his cultural policies. So I'm afraid he's a complete fail on that one. How about justice? So justice, is also about balance in Aristotle's teachings. He wants you to be just, and he doesn't want you to be insufficiently just, where you kind of just let everything go, do what you like, it's all chill, resulting in debauchery and ruin. Neither does he want you to be like excessively sort of, Soviet about the whole thing, vindictive, oppressive. Anyway, unfortunately, he went the wrong way on this one as well. Historian A.B. Bosworth basically describes his behavior as deliberate terrorism. He once crucified 2,000 men from a conquered people. He was endlessly going into rages. And actually that brings us on to his next point, which is moderation. So moderation is a key Aristotelian virtue. Again, you don't want to be some sort of ascetic, who never, has a piece of beef or a glass of wine, and, just denying yourself all the world's pleasure. But at the same time, you don't want to be a sort of debauched, over-the-top character, who needs 15 lines of cocaine before dinner to function. And I'm afraid Alexander was on the wrong side of this one too. In particular, one of his schoolmates, Clytus the Black, who was a big general of his, actually saved Alexander's life once in a battle. Alexander got a bit angry during a sort of dinner and murdered him by spearing him through the chest. Not a very nice way to treat a friend, and a clear example of lack of moderation. So that was our second point to look at in this famous myth of the dream of the tutor, was whether Alexander learned very much from Aristotle, and it's quite clear that despite not being one-on-one tutored by him, he basically learned nothing of value from the thing. And the third question is Alexander was that, and our third premise is very much that Alexander was a Our third premise was that it was the absorption of Aristotle's wisdom that led to Alexander's greatness. And here, let's go back to the school. So Alexander was actually the prized son of Philip II of Macedon, who'd, by the way, already built the world's best army. And if we go back to his classmates, we can see that he was basically part of an elite boarding school, and a really elite boarding school. You know, Hephaestion was his top general. Ptolemy, who wrote an account of Alexander's life, just one of his bloody schoolmates, is the person after whom the Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire is named. Cassander was his favorite admiral. Nearchus, Perdiccas. You know, these guys all played big roles in the empire. So clearly, it was a kind of it was an elite school for Macedonian nobles. You know, Alexander's life story is you know, much more obviously attributable to extremely favorable life circumstance, bordering on nepotism, a bit like Y Combinator startups or Eton College, England, where despite lack of merit, by going to these institutions, you can get ahead in the world, and which is why in the UK, you know, prime ministers are often British, and in Silicon Valley, funding rounds, despite the very low quality performance of Y Combinator public companies, you know, thousands of them, very few have even made it. You're very likely to get funding because of the brand, basically. So similar kind of deal, elite school, massive leg up in life. And so let's bring it back. So we've learned that Aristotle was not tutor to Alexander the Great, but instead had a boarding school for him. We've learned that even if he had been tutor, he learned none of the lessons which he would have done if he'd actually been paying attention. And thirdly, we learned that none of this has got anything to do with Alexander's greatness. Alexander was mainly got up in life by having exceptional circumstances, being the son of the king and inheriting the world's best army. And secondly, was not actually very great because his empire collapsed and he was a raving megalomaniacal maniac. So this then opens up the question of, like, what about the one-on-one tutor dream? I mean, does this leave it in ruins? Well, the good news is that this this anecdote is so incoherent. It's so badly chosen. It's so under-researched by those who promulgate it in Silicon Valley that actually we can't say yay or nay. Because actually, maybe if Aristotle had been in his tutor, he would have learned some good lessons, would have been less of a dick. Or maybe we can learn that actually there's something better than one-on-one tutoring. And that better thing might be having awesome classmates. That better thing might be the freedom to roam. That better thing might be something very, very different. So what I'm saying is we should not necessarily at all give up the dream that AI can transform education, but we should break out from and transcend the absurd notion that one-on-one tutors are the ideal of education. And if you want to test this out for yourself, ask 5 of your best friends about the greatest educational experience they have ever had. And you will find, I doubt not, you'll find that it's friendship, adventure, and agency which brings the greatest learning experiences, and not having some person who your parents paid to catch you up on schoolwork, leaning over your shoulder and stripping all the joy from life. That is our hypothesis at my max. Thank you.